Hey guys, welcome back to Keeping It Real. Today I'm going to be undertaking the giant task of ranking all films in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So let's kick things off with the pretty much unanimous bottom spot, and that goes to The Incredible Hulk. It's not so much a catastrophic film, as it is just not recognisable as part of the MCU that we've come to know. Edward Norton's been recast, and so it's very hard to view them as the same character anymore. That being said, I love the Jekyll and Hyde dynamic between Bruce Banner and the Hulk in this film. It feels like it lands with more dramatic weight because it's been played more for laughs in the last few Marvel outings, and it's got a couple of great sequences like the favela chase and the final fight. Next up is Thor: The Dark World. Now this film can't decide whether it wants to be really dark or really funny, and doesn't commit to either. The result is a hybrid of genres that don't feel compatible or cohesive. Even though Brian Tyler's score is the perfect mix of tragic and epic, this film suffers from a one-note villain and generic end-of-the-world stakes. So many people drop Iron Man 2 in the bottom 3, but for me it's got to be Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange had the chance to reinvigorate an already tired origin story formula and introduce an entirely new side to the MCU, but it fails at doing either. Selfish billionaire suffers physical injuries and becomes humbled by being deprived of his wealth and security. Now if that arc sounds familiar, that's because Iron Man has already done that to better effect. Now Doctor Strange had some great characters and some great visual sequences, and while I'm very excited to see where the sequel goes, it felt very run-of-the-mill with a bland antagonist when it should have been game-changing. Ant-Man felt so refreshing after Age of Ultron and benefited from being an intimate story of redemption with a parental aspect that hadn't been focused on in the MCU before. But Ant-Man and the Wasp felt like it was shoehorning that theme of family onto us by centering the plot around Hope and her journey to find her mum, a character who we haven't spent any time with to truly care about. And Scott Lang's evolution feels somewhat overlooked and neglected because of prioritising that storyline. Plus, I think it distracted from a compelling but underserved villain in the form of Ghost. The first Thor film comes next for me. It nicely contrasted the grandeur and scale of Asgard with the isolation of New Mexico. The comedy elements worked and helped contribute to that fish out of water tale. I really wish that Kenneth Branagh had directed the sequel as well, because with his Shakespearean background, I think he could have brought that darker thespian tone that Marvel wanted to capture. Unfortunately, Thor reaches a point by the end of the first film that doesn't really give him room to grow in the sequel and the next two Avengers films, and is ultimately overshadowed by Loki's more complex evolution. I really struggle with Captain Marvel. There's a cockiness to Carol Danvers that goes beyond the self-belief this film is about bestowing her with. I love the story, and I think the twist with the Skrulls being refugees manages to humanise an alien race more so than Guardians has managed to do. However, I don't like how they turn Nick Fury's eye into a gimmick played for laughs, and as a film concerned with setting up Captain Marvel's integration into the Avengers for Endgame, it feels surprisingly forgettable. Contrary to popular opinion, I love rewatching Iron Man 2. Sam Rockwell just oozes charisma as Justin Hammer, and it really delves into the themes of legacy and mortality in more introspective ways than the first movie. It goes deeper into Tony Stark's relationship with his father and with government, both of which become more prevalent in future films. Plus it gives us a kick-ass introduction to Black Widow, and the Monaco sequence gives us, in my opinion, Iron Man's best suit-up in the entire franchise. Ant-Man was allowed to do its own thing. The way it connected the story to S.H.I.E.L.D.'s early days and incorporated a cameo from Falcon were fun ways to connect it to the wider world, but it thrived when focusing on the small. It's let down by a melodramatic villain, but the final fight downgrading to a child's bedroom was a genius move and really centres in on what I said earlier about Ant-Man at its core being about family. Guardians 2 is a strange one. It scatters our heroes for most of the film, and while that works when they finally reunite and accept each other as their true family in the final act, it means that what made their group dynamic so much fun to watch in the first film is lost here. The opening sequence is one of the best in the entire MCU, and Yondu's death, being one of the only sacrifices with any lasting finality in this saga, plays with real emotion and sentiment. Unfortunately, I think a lot of the humour lands with a dud this time round, and I think the introduction of Mantis is just one character too many with an awkward sense of humour. It's an okay film, but by the end of it you really don't feel like a lot has happened. The first Captain America works because it dedicates enough time to setting up who Steve Rogers is as a man without the serum. If we didn't connect to him at a personal level, then the rest of the film would have felt like a generic good guys versus bad guys binary, but Chris Evans conveys a lot of self-doubt and interiority that gives the World War II plot its beating heart. Spider-Man Far From Home had to reintroduce us to a world post-Endgame and mostly sticks to the landing. It's fun watching his relationship with MJ grow. The school trip, giving it a global scale, forces Peter to become this bigger hero while allowing him to retain that youthful vulnerability that defines who he is. My main gripe is Peter's decision to gift off the Edith glasses to Mysterio. It's the plot point that the rest of the film hinges on and sets in motion Peter Parker's arc of learning to become independent of his idols. However, it just felt too naive from his character's perspective, considering there wasn't that much screen time between Spider-Man and Mysterio to make that relationship seem trusting enough to justify the decision. Hot on its heels is Iron Man 3, a very divisive film, but for the most part I love it. It once again strips Tony Stark back to his essential components with added PTSD following the Avengers that makes his larger-than-life personality suddenly feel very insular and trapped, which makes his relationship with Harley so heartwarming and watchable. The action scenes all felt distinct and creative, and while I can't wait to see the Mandarin properly brought to life in Shang-Chi, I think Ben Kingsley gave Trevor Slattery enough charm to make that curveball work. Having the self-awareness to skip over Spider-Man's origins was definitely the right choice for Homecoming. His relationship with Ned is fantastic, and the social dilemmas of loyalty and popularity that come with adolescence are very relatable and grounding. Having Iron Man as a mentor here helps to make Spider-Man's inclusion in Civil War feel less like a marketing ploy and more like a fleshed out relationship, and the twist with Michael Keaton is very satisfying. Bringing in the top 10 is Age of Ultron, probably the worst Avengers film, but still very underrated. It went beyond the verbal sparring of the first Avengers and introduced the philosophical debates that became important going forward. What does global security look like? Do these heroes have the right to intervene? And are they ultimately their own worst enemy? The party scene makes us crave more time with these characters, and James Spader has that gravitas as an actor that brings a melancholy self-loathing and toddler-like impulsiveness to Ultron that makes him calculating and unpredictable. There is no denying Black Panther's importance, what it represented as a film and as a symbol for cultural expression, delivering a central conflict that broke free from the villain curse that's haunted this franchise, and imbued the narrative with the societal problems of exclusivity and otherness that echo problems we face in the world today. I think the cliche of having the hero lose early on and then trying to convince us that he's dead felt a bit too heavy-handed, and the final fight was truly awful, but the film as a whole was definitely one of the strongest standalone entries in the franchise. Guardians of the Galaxy shook things up in a big way, a ragtag group of misfits who equally felt fleshed out and distinct. James Gunn expanded this universe beyond comprehension. With a soundtrack oozing retro vibes and channeling early sci-fi space operas, Guardians gave us some great scenes like the prison escape and the dance-off, but ultimately felt weighed down by a generic villain, and depending on your mood, sometimes the comedy can feel a bit too cringe. A universe was born. Before Bifrost's magic and aliens existed, we had one man coming to terms with his own place in the world. The first 40 minutes of Iron Man are a masterclass in non-linear storytelling and suspense, with one of the most under-recognised characters in Tony Stark's evolution, Yinsen. The Middle Eastern setting helped give the superheroics a contemporary relevance, while the film's biggest downside was probably a CGI finale smackdown. Still, Iron Man not getting the girl at the end of the film was a nice middle finger to narrative stereotypes, and Robert Downey Jr. just owns this performance, especially considering you spend large amounts of time just with him tinkering in his workshop. Just missing out on the top 5 is Avengers Assemble, the first film I saw in the cinema more than once. The final half hour is spectacular, and Alan Silvestri's soundtrack just adds to the epic novelty of seeing these characters in the same frame for the first time. Loki's over-the-top delusion of grandeur is nicely contrasted by his more grounded opponents. MVP has got to be the Hulk, as the CGI work is the best it's been out of all his appearances, and when he's unleashed here you truly feel his loss in Endgame and Infinity War. This is an excellent film, but the cinematography doesn't quite feel as professional or aesthetic as the other Avenger movies, and the dialogue, while witty and quirky, can sometimes miss out on that depth. Thor Ragnarok was an adrenaline boost of colour and energy into Thor's expired arc. A great performance by Hemsworth helped the imagery and quirkiness of Taika Waititi's script feel fresh but authentic. Loki's role as the foil/sidekick was incorporated perfectly, and it was nice to see Bruce Banner get some much needed attention, but I don't think the duo of Hela's Scourge landed with either the comedy or the tragedy of a groomed protege that Waititi intended, and the decision to butcher the Warriors 3 after 10 seconds of screen time felt like a real waste of Ray Stevenson and Zachary Levi. But Ragnarok transcended genre and still feels the most liberated out of any MCU film. Fourth, we have Winter Soldier. Captain America's arc in this film is supreme. The action sequences are practical and visually stunning. Nick Fury's car chase is a real display of technical proficiency in camera work and editing, and Henry Jackman's score creates such a unique mood and ambience that brilliantly mediates between chaos and idealism. The Russo brothers find the best MCU duo in Cap and Black Widow, and the stoic values of hope and honour threatened by modern corruption are handled with nuance, making this a lean thriller with Cap's very sense of self being questioned and challenged. I don't think Infinity War is the best MCU film.
Oh, what?
While Thanos, Wanda, Gamora and Thor all have great character arcs, everyone else feels shortchanged. Structurally it's tighter than Endgame, but the various parties off on independent missions can sometimes disrupt the pace quite frequently. Some of the comedy undermines important character moments like Drax's invisibility gag that gets in the way of Gamora and Quill's heart-to-heart, and Hulk's will he won't he emerge in the final battle that just ends up being anticlimactic. Nevertheless, there are some great team-ups like Iron Man meeting Doctor Strange and Thor teaming up with the Guardians, and show-stopping dramatic scenes like the murder of Heimdall and Loki, the battle on Titan, and the Battle of Wakanda. Thor is the MVP of this battle, and his entry into Wakanda in the 11th hour is goosebump-inducing and just makes you certain that the Avengers will win. And that sense of triumph makes the finale both narratively subversive and tragic for the heroes while reminding us that this is ultimately Thanos' film. Second is Endgame, without doubt the best cinematic experience I've ever had, and in many ways it deserves podium position. The emotional payoff for the previous decade is as close to perfect as you can get. The OG Avengers are front and centre, and we say goodbye to 3 of them. I just hope that Marvel don't bring these characters back, because in order for the gut punches of Endgame to work, there needs to be permanence to losing them. The portal scene is the greatest scene of all time for me, and I don't think I'm ever going to have that emotional rollercoaster ever again. The first hour is suitably morose and introspective, and the final hour is all about spectacle and catharsis. For me, it's the middle hour that lets it down slightly. Though there are some great callbacks courtesy of the time travelling, we've spent the first hour with these characters apart who have just reunited under common cause, only for them to split up again. Like Infinity War, sometimes that results in some structural choppiness, and I'm not sure how I feel about Hulk and Rhodey mainly getting used for comedy relief, but that isn't detriment to the film overall. Thanos doesn't have the philosophical complexities he does in Infinity War, but boasts a more merciless figure, and that establishes a lack of restraint that makes him pose a real threat to the Avengers. Bottom line, I love this film. But Civil War has the top spot for me. The moral and philosophical questions this film raises are deep and unanswerable, and for once the idea of heroes and villains becomes entirely subjective. Every character is written so well. The introduction of Black Panther is cool and sophisticated without ever being intrusive. The action scenes are all different, and the finale of this film is devastatingly raw. Chris Evans and Robert Downey Jr. get to add so many layers to their characters in this film, and yes, while it's not as epic as Endgame, it's the film that enables Infinity War and Endgame to have the effect that they do because of the development that goes on here. I'm not even that big a fan of the airport battle because the best scenes in Civil War are the ones that put characters in situations that they can't punch their way out of, and forces them to examine the consequential nature of what it means to be a hero. It elevated the MCU into a standard of filmmaking that wasn't fan service or spectacle, but a scarily objective character study. That was a mammoth task, guys, so thank you for sticking with me. I appreciate that everyone's opinions are different, so please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear them. For now, please like and subscribe, check out my Tenet review, and I'll be sure to have some more content up and running very shortly. Thank you very much. See you next time.